In this presentation, I'd like to look at the art of Julie Mehretu. Julie was born in 1970 in Ethiopia, and at a young age she moved to Michigan with her family to escape violence and political turmoil in the region. She is still living and currently is living in New York, and she sometimes works out of another studio that she has in Berlin. She's received a lot of awards for her art, most notably the MacArthur Fellowship in 2005, and her work was also exhibited at the 2019 Biennale in Venice, Italy. The theme was May You Live in Interesting Times. I actually saw her work there. I did not remember until I looked through the list and I recognized her art from seeing it at that exhibition, so that was really cool. For materials, most of her work uses acrylic and ink on canvas. Some of her drawings use graphite on canvas or on linen or paper. I really like her work because her shapes and lines seem to float up and be like sort of playing with dimensions. It's hard to tell at first if it's two-dimensional or three-dimensional, and they don't really seem to be anchored, but then at the same time they also seem very anchored because of this sort of map-like precision, and there is a perspective in her drawings, as you can see, with some of the shapes getting smaller as they like sort of follow a curve. Like you can almost imagine there's just a kind of invisible sphere in the middle of this drawing, which was done in 2004, that the other objects are orbiting around. This is one of her drawings. It's untitled. It was from the 2012 Mind, Breath, and Beat drawing collection. This particular drawing includes ink and acrylic in addition to graphite. Here are some of her other drawings that are just graphite on paper. I really like her use of repetitive shapes to create patterns. Especially she seems to use a lot of the same marks in just different sizes, like on the drawing on the right. These are both just titled Mind Breath drawing. They have like the sort of a U or arch shape that is repeated like in a very, very tiny size, a medium size, and then a much larger size. And then in the background, she consistently looks like smudges some type of softer graphite to create depth, which I really think is cool. Here's another one of her Mind Breath drawings. When reading about her, I read that she was initially inspired by etchings, and this really resonated with me because I primarily do lino cuts, so I'm familiar with working very slowly and carefully on making really precise, small marks, and I definitely see the influence of that in her drawings. You can see the way that the curves move more gradually. There aren't a lot of like completed circles, a lot of straight lines, a lot of really small marks that are almost triangular, which imitates the way an etching blade looks. She termed her use of marks as developing her own language by using all these dots and lines and other really small, precise marks. And I thought it was interesting. She calls her groupings of marks communities, which does seem very fitting, and it's also interesting considering that she's really interested in how art and political events impact collective thinking and humanity as a collective whole. So I like that she terms her marks as communities, again, like focusing on the collective. This image is actually from the Biennale in 2019. That's some of the work that she had on display. So you can see it's really different from the work that we just looked at. This is much more recent, whereas before the drawings were from about 2012 and the acrylic and ink from the early 2000s. So most of her work is very focused on politics and how political or cultural events affect people, especially affecting their subconscious. And she mentions a lot that she's more interested in the collective experience versus the individual experience. And I think this is interesting because she considers herself Ethiopian and American, and American culture is very individualistic. So I think it's cool that she incorporates a very collective experience into her artwork. And then her art is also influenced by the information overload that technology has exposed us to. I get that sense looking at her drawings. It definitely can feel overwhelming. Lots of tiny pieces of information and marks to take in. So this is another more recent of her work, and when she was asked in an interview about her relationship with her art and with the art world, she said, "For me, it's about negotiating oneself and contemporary existence through aesthetics and the politics of our social reality," which I think she frequently frames her work as a negotiation, and you kind of see that in the chaos of her work, how negotiating can be very complicated and messy, and there's parts that are very precise and then parts that seem very faded out. But overall, I think that's a very good way that she described how her work makes a viewer feel. These are two of her pieces of art that are pretty spaced out in terms of time. The one on the top was created in 2001, and the one on the right was from 2019. And so you can see that her work has evolved a lot, but I can definitely it's very believable that it's by the same person. I can see that she really evolved as an artist, but kept to things that were important to her, like the small marks, marks with like a triangular corner or point to them. Her color palette is still pretty similar, even though she uses a lot more color in her more recent work. The background is more colored in versus a toned background or a white background. And then here you can see this is a drawing that I did. It was really hard to make a drawing that was inspired by somebody else's ideas because I don't really have those ideas, even though I like her art a lot. So keeping it, like making something different but sort of inspired. So I tried to move in with some dark areas, dark lines that imitated a type of circular motion in space. And you can see this is what it ended up looking like, having some of those like grid lines to sort of show mapping along with small scribbles, blending the graphite and the ink. I would have more enjoyed probably doing a painting inspired by her work because I really like her use of color rather than a drawing. But it was still fun, and I enjoyed like doing repetitive different types of marks. And then there is my works cited page.